Thank you so much for coming down.
I'm
Great.
grateful for panels on my road.
Excellent.
I mean, I
It
really,
is what it
We're
is,
working
as
on it.
always.
I know, it's a tough job. Thank you.
Thank you. You're very welcome. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the question.
I would be concerned about a centralized repository.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Amy Shollenberger. I'm your friendly moderator for this panel. I'm going to let Chris and Marilyn introduce themselves in a second. I just want to let you know we have about a half an hour total. I have a few questions I'm going to ask, and then we'll open it up for questions if you guys have some. So if you both want to start just by a little introduction of who you are.
Sure. Thanks. Chris Recchia, I'm your friendly commissioner for this evening. Commissioner of the Public Service Department. We're in charge of energy and telecommunications. Energy takes a lot of my time, and Vermont Yankee is one of those issues. So obviously we'll talk a lot about the status of this compared to the Indian Point and where they are. But great movie. Look forward to talking to it about it. Marilyn.
I'm Marilyn Elie. I'm one of the people involved in the ongoing effort to close Indian Point, and I'd like to say that I really feel a connection to Vermont because Dead Cats and Citizens Awareness Network were in Westchester. They were our original mentors. We had our first group down there was Westchester Citizens Awareness Network, based on what was already ongoing here in Vermont. So we're cousins, actually.
I just want to say thank you to both of you for joining the panel. And I did want to note that Chris Williams from Citizens Awareness Network was planning to join us tonight, but he had a family health issue, so he sent his regrets instead. So if any of you came to see him, my apologies. So one thing that struck me watching the film and having been involved here with the Vermont Yankees stuff is just the sort of epic battle between the states and the people who live near the plants. Mm-hmm. States' rights, local rights, versus these regulations that are federal, that can't be preempted, that are obviously essentially set by the industry. And I'm guessing you both have really strong feelings about that issue. I was wondering if you would just address it a little bit from your perspective as an activist and also as a commissioner representing the state and the people who live here.
Yeah, so should we just keep going?
Sure,
this way? So, one of the struggles and one of the interesting things that has occurred is, and what you saw about the Nuclear Regulatory Commission with Yatsko and with Allison McFarland, I got a chance to meet. She was not there very long, but there is a structure in place that just is like they say it's all about safety, and yet it affects everybody else: states' rights, states' interests, financial interests, and it's not being adequately addressed. And so the real place where this has come to a head, Indian Point, Vermont Yankee, Pilgrim, the fact that these are now merchant plants, are not regulated by the states any longer, and so we have no regulatory control over them like we used to. We never had control over the radiological piece, but at least we had control over the rates and the behavior of the organization and the structure. As merchant plants, where they just are private entities buying and selling power on the grid to people who are interested in buying it, we don't have that control anymore. And so we've been increasingly trying to get states' rights and understanding about decommissioning, in particular for us, and the expenditures from a decommissioning fund that our ratepayers established, that is now in Entergy's hands to spend as they choose to. It's showing a lot of warts in this whole thing. And there is to Allison McFarland's credit, before she left, she said, we need to establish a rulemaking process by which we can go forward And, we really need to reevaluate whether things like the safe store option should be an option. And I was testifying before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission at that time and said, yay, absolutely, it should not. It is a financial mechanism for these private merchant plants. There is no safety or structural or environmental reason to delay decommissioning once a plant is closed.
Amen to that. Who knows, A, if the company will be there, and B, the rationale for that is that, well, the decommissioning fund's not quite big enough, we'll let it grow through interest rates because the company's not putting any more money in it. However, costs go up as well. So all of that is just a ploy for the company to walk away as quickly as possible and for as long as possible, stay away from any kind of responsibility for cleaning up their mess, basically. I'd kind of like to reframe this from states' rights and individual rights to corporate rights versus democracy, because I really see that with Indian Point, and what it is a corporate struggle for profit over the health and safety of 20 million people. And you can look at it in many different ways, but because it's a merchant plant, we don't know and cannot find out where they are selling their electricity. So those of us in the area around Indian Point assume the risk in the 50-mile area, and much of the electricity we know for sure, some of it comes to New England, but much of it is sold elsewhere. We can track part of it, but only 500 megawatts, because that's what our public transmission system has to make public. So it really is a corporate struggle against people in a giant corporation, international corporation, against those of us who would like to have clean and green energy. And I'd also say that the existence of that plant really slows down the adoption of renewables in many different ways on the market. And while I'm talking about that, I'll just say a great deal of all of actually the replacement power for Indian Point is now in place, which is a great step.
Say more about that.
Oh, okay. Excuse me. 3 years ago, the Governor Cuomo, established what he called an Indian Point contingency plan. And he charged the Public Service Commission, which then charged our New York State, operators grids, NISO, with coming up with a plan should Indian Point be decommissioned. And they put out requests for proposals, and it doesn't cost people, the ratepayers, anything, because this is where a company looks at the proposal and says, oh yeah, we can make some money here. We'll put up the capital to improve the transmission line. We'll put up the capital to make sure that we can get electricity from wind energy from upstate New York down. And the NISO did a lot of things, and they encouraged demand response. They brought in clean energy from upstate. They also did some gas, that's in the mix, but they were from plants that were already existing. What they were trying to do was eliminate an energy boycott, a bottleneck, an energy bottleneck, so that we could have more energy, the market would work better without these restrictions and constrictions. And so now we have 5,872 additional megawatts, way more than the 2,060 megawatts that the plant produces. So if Indian Point were to go off the line tomorrow, units 2 and 3 together, our grid wouldn't even blink. But try to tell people that. There is an attitude of scarcity. We have to have more and more and more, when in fact we don't. You have proved that here in Vermont.
Yeah. Thanks, Marilyn. And on the way back, maybe I'll just say, sorry, Amy, this is what happens when you get two people who really like to. So we, had the same experience. In Vermont Yankee is a 620 megawatt power plant. Vermont never bought more than 1/3 of that for its own power. We stopped buying power before its relicensing occurred because we did not feel like we didn't want to be hypocritical of saying we don't think it should be relicensed and still be buying energy from it. It was like, no, we're not doing that. Our utilities did not do that. And
And you're
And
like,
I got
stay
calls.
on.
I got calls, for a year afterwards, like, how are you surviving without Vermont Yankee running? It's like, well, we don't buy any power from them, and we haven't for several years, so we don't have that problem. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that we have expanded our solar power in the last 5 to 6 years. We have 250 megawatts of solar that is coming online in this coming year. That is, that's more, although it's, granted that is intermittent power versus baseload power, but a nameplate capacity that is equal to any amount of power that we got from Vermont Yankee. We did that in like 3 to 5 years, so it can be done.
Maybe we should talk about baseload and intermittent, that you brought it up. Okay. It's true the sun doesn't shine all the time, and the wind doesn't blow all the time in the same place, but the wind is always blowing somewhere. And especially if you go to offshore wind or if you go to the Great Lakes, the wind is always blowing in the ocean, especially with offshore wind. So the whole attitude that you can't do a grid with renewables, that you can call it intermittent if you want to, however, you just need to sort of look at it in a different way, like they do in Germany, for example, with their Energiewende program. They sometimes have so much wind that they can run their whole grid practically on that clean and green energy, and they end up selling some of it to France, which is really a paradox because France is so noted for its nuclear, which they are also cutting back on. But what I'm proposing is a way to look at the grid in a different manner. Look at it like the internet. Look at it like all of these little points of distributed generation that are around, all of it feeding into a system that makes a really much stronger system, because if something goes down, you've got all these other things that can be on quick on and quick off. And you can't do that with the big fossil fueled, nuclear fueled plants that we have now. It takes a long time to bring them up. It takes a long time to take them down. So you could say that one of the disadvantages of nuclear is that it does not have a quick on and off switch like our renewables. And I think that's important, especially if you look at that new model, distributed generation, and stop thinking of these fossil fuel, uranium fueled dinosaurs.
Shocking, nothing to add.
I'll just make a note that there's a net metering rule in play right now that y'all can make comments on that plays into that issue right now here in Vermont. Maybe Chris will say something about that in a few minutes. So one of the things that nobody ever wants to talk about is the spent fuel, right? And, we're dealing with that issue right here in Vermont now. We have a spent fuel pool that's bursting at the seams. Entergy has a permit request in for a certificate of public good for a second pad. I don't know much about your spent fuel situation there in New York, but maybe you could each talk about where we're at with that.
Yep. So thanks. Yeah, fuel is, to me, that is the Achilles heel of this whole industry, frankly. I mean, I think the safety issues can, with creative, intelligent people, can be managed. The fuel issue is just, it makes me crazy.
Right.
Vermont Yankee has 42 years of fuel that's stored there from spent fuel purposes. It is going to require management and active, assessment and protection for thousands, tens of thousands of years. We can't even keep track of things we want to know about a couple of thousand years ago, right? Where's the Holy Grail? Where's the Noah's Ark? We can't find those things, and we thought they were important. How are we going to keep track of things that we really don't want to, we don't want to know about, like nuclear fuel for 10,000 years? So I'm really concerned about this. I mean, I would say, and I've said this before, I'm upset that the federal government took responsibility for the fuel at all of our expense. I'm upset that they haven't found a solution to it. And I'm upset that the nuclear industry has basically said, hey, that's the federal government's problem. We can just keep on doing this stuff. I was invited a couple of years ago to do a keynote address at a nuclear energy conference, and I really didn't know why they invited me, but I did go, and I said, I started with good morning, I'm kicking this conference off, I wish you well. Your industry is dead unless and until you deal with the fuel issue. And I said a lot more after that, but it was like, have a nice day. And they invited me back the next year, and I'm really not sure why they did that, but they did. But this is a serious problem. I think dry cask is better in the sense that it's a passive system versus an active system in the pool, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission does not recognize the difference at the moment. And that's crazy. That's the arrogance of humanity, thinking that, oh, you know, we can find solutions to everything that we create. And, you know, sometimes we just can't. So.
Well, should there have been any doubt about what you just said last, all you have to do is look at Fukushima, where they had a flood wall that they thought would surely top any tsunami that might come along, and then they put their generators below sea level. So that really was human arrogance, I think. There are even markers from ancient times that along the beach that said in ancient Japanese script, do not build any closer to the ocean than this point. And of course, over time, people did. They forgot. And sure enough, the tsunami came. There have been other big tsunamis like that. It came up to those markers, but not very much past it. We forgot that ancient wisdom. They forgot that ancient wisdom. And spent fuel is toxic for 240 million years, which is longer than we have had human beings on this planet. Certainly longer than any of our recorded history by far. So why do we want to do and create our energy and use something that we can't process, we can't put an end to? We're leaving this huge toxic mess, and just as you so adequately described, it's sitting there in spent fuel pools at Indian Point. They can't get any more in unless they take something out. So the company has been forced to, if they want to keep operating, to go to dry cask storage, which indeed I think is safer, and so does the Union of Concerned Scientists and many other people. A fire in a spent fuel pool is one of the worst things that could happen, could lead to a station blackout and many other terrible things with a huge release of radiation. There's more radiation in the spent fuel at Indian Point than there was in all of the spent fuel pools at Fukushima. It's a lot of radiation sitting there in a commercial building under 40 foot of water, leaking. Both of the spent fuel pools are three reactors were at Indian Point. One has been closed, Unit 1, and that spent fuel pool was empty because it was leaking into the Hudson. Nobody knows how long or how much water. The other two are leaking, and that water goes right downhill. Radioactive isotopes go into the Hudson, and if you listen to the NRC, dilution is the answer to pollution. So what if you have a little tritium in your river? I frankly prefer my rivers and my drinking water without tritium. And the Hudson is a source of drinking water. So it's mostly the plants upstream of the river, but then the river's tidal. So it gets to be very complicated, except you come back to a very simple fact. We don't know what to do with this. We need to stop making it. We need to corral, I think that's a good word, corral what we have, put it on dry land, not ship it to other communities, not ship it away, there is no away, but keep it there and figure out a way that practically verges on science fiction. You know, how are you going to communicate all these years down the road to say to people, don't go there, this is bad, you can die. You know, what language do you put it in for starters? But where do you bury it? How do you, in Finland they're doing a geological deposit, it's called the place that's designed to, you have to remember to forget it. So that they'll put it back, it'll look natural on the top, and they'll put some, they're trying to figure out the universal warning signs that they can post around. And it's like science fiction, it really is, to keep track of all that. So how anybody in their right mind can want to continue to add to this mess? I do not understand. Does that answer some of your
Thank you.
questions?
Do you want to say something about net metering?
Yes, I can say something about net metering, but first I want to congratulate Marilyn. In the film, several times you said, what are we leaving to our children? And that's really the key on this fuel issue, which is on what planet, and I guess that's ours, can you produce energy for 40, 50, even if it was 80 or 100 years, and produce a ramification that lasts hundreds of thousands of years for other people to deal with? In what generation of people would feel that that is okay to do? Not mine.
There's something else I meant to add and forgot. I think it's appropriate, since we're dealing with merchant plants now, you can say they want to privatize the profits and socialize the cost, because that's exactly what's happening with the plants across the country.
Okay, net metering. So does anyone know what do you want to take questions yet?
We'll take questions in 1 second.
Who here knows what net metering is? So I know where to start. A couple. Okay, half. So net metering is where you produce your own energy or produce energy at a local distributed location like your house or your farm, and you offset your bill that you would normally get from the electrical company. And so the energy goes back into the grid and comes out of the grid, and magic happens, and you see that you used, 1,000 kilowatt hours this month, but you produced 800 kilowatt hours, and so your bill is only the 200 kilowatt hours. And we've been doing net metering for quite a while now in Vermont, and we started slow with the idea that, boy, it would be nice for people to do this, but we're concerned about electric rates, so we set a cap of 4% on it to be. This was in 2002, 2004. We said we had a 4% cap on it, which we started to come up against and hit in 2011, 12, and people thought, well, that was good, that was successful, people like it, they want to do more of it, and we seem to be growing the solar industry. Let's set net metering at 15%, but also let's maybe not put a cap on. Let's establish a statute for a renewable energy standard and things like that get us to our 90% renewable by 2050 goal. And so we put 15% in, thinking that would give us plenty of time to get a rule in place by 2017, next year, that would guide net metering for the future. And this is the rule that I think Amy's asking about. Well, we hit that 15% cap in like 18 months. Talking to our largest utility, it was like, well, we think we're going to hit it middle of next year. This was last year, middle of next year, which would be this year. And then they were like, well, it looks like it's coming up closer. We're going to hit it sooner than that. And every month they would update me and tell me it was 6 months away. And then as it got to be weekly updates, I got to learn that it was months away. And then it was like, oh, we hit it yesterday. and that all occurred in a span of a couple of months last year. So we were a full, year and a half ahead. Shows the commitment that Vermonters have to actually doing this and the desire to do it. And I promise you the next net metering rule, which is coming through now, will have no cap, but it does have incentives to build in places where we want the net metering to occur, on rooftops, on parking lots, on developed land, do a disincentive for building on farmland and open space. Just like everything else, it's always easier to build in an open green field, right? The Walmarts of the world love that. The same is true for solar, and we realized as we grew through this that we need to direct people and provide the right incentives to pay more for places we want it, on rooftops and on landfills or wherever else, and to discount, the ability to build it elsewhere. So a new rule is coming out of the Public Service Board. I'm in the department. The board is like the court, and I'm like the public advocate, to structure net metering going forward in that manner. different incentives for how much you'd get compensated for your kilowatt hours on that basis. And I know Vermonters think this is a tremendous program, and we're very excited about continuing it. And as I said, we've done about 250 megawatts of electricity through these small distributed generation net metering projects, and other solar too, to be fair.
So that rule is coming out, and if you're part of an advocacy organization that works on energy issues, you'll probably be getting action alerts about sending in comments. And I know that Commissioner Recchia would love to get your comments.
I would love your comments.
So pay attention and look for that. So Carl, I see you have a question.
Yes. My name is Carl, and I am a net meter.
Yay.
Hi, Carl.
But that's not what my question is about. Thanks for the explanation of the new rule. I have a theory of change question. I really liked Roger Witherspoon's metaphor in the beginning of the film about being shot at and the different perceptions of being shot at, whether you're a soldier or a civilian. And I see that applies in the renewable industry here. Folks who resist the encroachment of renewables, as they would put it in Vermont, say, we have this destruction of mountain ecosystems and put up wind power projects, and we can't even handle the power on the grid sometimes. And so why do this? And people who are promoting renewables say, yes, so it's an issue to be working on, is how to strengthen our grid so we can take more renewables in different places. And I see the same thing in this film about nuclear power. I thought it did a really good job of presenting both sides of it. So I'm wondering, in the theory of change, what you do to flip someone's perspective from nuclear fuel issue is a really interesting issue to be studying. We should be doing more geological studies. We should wait till Harry Reid gets out of office so we can go back to Nevada and Yucca Mountain, et cetera, to saying, look, this is fatal for the industry and we need to shut it down. Or, that's just one example of an issue that you could look at that way. So I'd be interested in perspectives on that.
One thing I would say is Fukushima changed a lot of people's minds, I think. I think we saw that with Commissioner Jasko, and how for that one man that really changed everything. But I'd like to hear your perspectives too. But for me, that was I saw a lot of people that I've been talking to for years drastically change their mind when Fukushima happened.
So the only thing I'll say, and I'll be quick, is, God, maybe my brain works differently than most people's, but I don't feel the need to experience every bad thing in order to adjust to it. So I've always pictured just a simple issue of how much power are we getting for how long, and what are the ramifications, and that's enough to get me to what I think is the renewable distributed generation, properly sized systems for the power that we need, and to also get everyone to be accountable and responsible for the desire to go to the wall and turn on the light switch. Well, then you have a responsibility to actually help make that happen. And the fact that some people don't like looking at these things, I'm sorry, let's take a trip to West Virginia and look at mountaintop removal of coal mining and see how you'd feel if that were in your backyard. So, it doesn't take, unfortunately we have these examples, but I don't need them in order to see kind of what we should be doing. And I think most people don't.
Change is hard, and I have been looking very intensively these last 2 years, maybe 3, at what you do about the perception of people, the perception, not the facts, not what's real, but the perception, the common knowledge that most people have. And you can look at any movement that's come along. You can call it a destabilization industry like Uber that comes in and takes on a taxicab, established taxicab, and that whole industry just sort of falls to pieces. Well, in some ways that's what's happening in the electricity business, especially with distributed generation, and the utilities going into what's called a death spiral. They're dealing with it with Germany. We're dealing with it in New York. What do you do with these big old companies that have chugged along for so many years? Their stock has been gold for widows and orphans, which is what they will tell you. You know, do you want their stock to go down? Do you want them to go out of business? How do you maintain your grid? These are all questions that we can deal with. These are business questions. And there's no reason in the world that they can't be dealt with. People on solar are not getting a free ride, as the utilities frequently say. You know, we all need to pay a fair share of the upkeep for the transmission lines. What they're doing in New York with revising the energy vision with that program is sort of like what they're doing with airplane seats. You're charged different, in fact that's the model I believe they're moving towards. You can be charged different things for the same seat. You may be paying a different rate for the person that you're sitting right next to, depending on the program, depending on a whole bunch of different options. Is that the way to go? I don't know. But it's one business model, and how do you disengage the utilities from making money as they sell more and more electricity? Because the simple fact is we do not need to be selling more and more electricity. We're using more electrical devices, but they take less electricity because they're better made, and manufacturers are aware of that, and they're cheaper to run, and all of those reasons. And Vermont has been so good about looking at closing the cycles and all kinds of recycling, and making sure that when you get a device, you can take it apart and the components can go back and be reused, that kind of thing. Well, you can't do that with a nuclear power plant. You can do it to some extent with the wind turbines. And what about, you know, this waste? It's very anti-democratic to say, let's put it back, or let's bring Yucca Mountain back online, or let's put it in another community that doesn't want it. Who are we to give them our garbage? You know, they live there, they don't want it. Why should they be forced to take it? And that's what was happening at Yucca Mountain, and that's why the Northern Shoshone and the whole state of Nevada, including Harry Reid, fought tooth and nail to block it. They don't have a nuclear power plant. Why should they become the radiological dump of the country? So where is consent? Where is democracy in this process? I think we have to look at all these factors, and they can be figured out. They're not insurmountable. What it seems to me that at this point is insurmountable is a very laissez-faire kind of feeling on the part of the public that, yeah, we've got the status quo and it's always been this way and it's always going to be this way. We just have to keep producing more and more and more. And we don't. We just don't. And there are facts and figures and studies to back that up. And Vermont has produced a lot of those studies and facts.
Yeah. Thank you, Marilyn. On the way back, I'll just say, you know, like we have one of the best efficiency utilities in the country. We are reducing our load, not increasing it. We have a utility. We have structured our utility regulations such that we decoupled the incentives to produce more power versus their income and their compensation. And so I actually have, you know, the utilities working toward renewable energy, and they're looking at their model is, well, maybe I could sell heat pumps and deal with improvements of thermal. Maybe I can sell, you know, we can get electric cars installed and I'll get more electricity that way, rather than just trying to sell people more electricity for the purpose of using inefficient things like how do we use it to transform our energy future. And you know, I'm grateful that they're partners in that. It's a lot easier to work with them than against them. But I still have to work against them quite a bit. But on some things it's nice to at least have some common ground.
I saw some other questions. One other thing I'll add is I think our comprehensive energy plan in Vermont helps to change the story too. I think it's a good read. I think it gives us great hope. I think that as a state, thinking about how can we move towards a different energy future helps everyone to see that possibility. And I think it really helps to be able to see a new possibility versus only to turn away from the things that we don't want. I don't know your name, sorry.
Yeah, I'm Skyler Gold. Speaking of legacy, we're leaving our children, Commissioner. I was wondering if you could give us a thumbnail sketch of the department's recommendation to the Public Service Board regarding Energy's proposed IPSEC, and why the department is not recommending a more robust below-ground facility, which in the context of a $1.2 billion decommissioning, the additional $30 million that they suggest it may cost, without considering possibly reduced decommissioning costs, a timeline which, you know, if we don't get it right now, we're going to be paying for it for many, many, many years. The likelihood of this waste leaving Vermont before Energy's projected 2052 date is virtually nil. And so I am wondering, what is the department's recommendation to the Public Service Board, and why?
So just, I'm not sure everybody in the back heard, I'm just gonna say the question is about the spent fuel pad, or the ISFC, and the Certificate of Public Good, and the recommendation to the Public Service Board.
So I'll start by saying I very much appreciate differences of opinion on this issue. I believe it is in Vermont's interest to get this fuel, the spent fuel, out of the pool and into dry cask as soon as possible. We already have a pad with cylinders that are stored there vertically. There are 13 there, they can hold another 20 something, and then we need another pad to support the remaining, for a total, I believe, of 53. I might have that number wrong. I think what is being discussed here is there is an option that's being used out in San Onofre to put the fuel in dry cask, but underground, basically, so you can't see it. We are along the shore here. We along the Connecticut River. There's groundwater issues. There's excavation issues, and truly, in Vermont, you can argue that in other places there may be other issues that warrant this, but in Vermont, I think this is an aesthetic issue, and I don't think it's worth the delay or the cost associated with it. I will, as long as I'm in this job, I'll work to try and find a home for this fuel that doesn't impose on other communities that don't want it. It doesn't belong on the shore, in the floodplain. I grant you, this is above the floodplain where it's being constructed, but the urgency that I feel to get this out of the pool and into dry cask does not warrant the change in design and the added expense of doing the underground dry cask. These are above ground. I'm not going to say they're safe, but they are a heck of a lot safer than, in my mind, than the fuel in the pool. So that's our position.
Very low bar.
If you have anything to add.
Callaway is another nuclear plant that also uses underground storage with the dry cask storage. They bury the dry casts. And it is an ethical and moral dilemma about what to do with all of this high-level radioactive waste when it's on the Hudson River or when it's on the shore. It seems to me that at the very least, we cannot transport it across the country, leaving a trail of radioactive isotopes behind, that if it has to be moved from certain plants because of geological considerations, then maybe it can be maintained safely in state. Maybe it can be moved to different places if it has to be moved for those reasons. But I have seen nothing that says a centralized depository is safer than individual repositories around the country. I've seen nothing that makes me think any big centralized storage area is going to be a better option. A lot of the people who propose that option are those who look at the spent fuel not as a waste, but as a resource. That's what they call it. They think that, oh, we can reuse it, we can reprocess it, and that's also been a disaster. So for that and other reasons, I certainly don't think that a centralized depository is a good idea.
I agree with that. I worked hard to help stop centralized repository. And I'll just say, Citizens Awareness Network has a position that maybe not underground, but at least there should be berming around the dry cask, which would help with some security issues, so that you don't necessarily have to bury it, but you can put earth around it.
Security and radiation.
That's right, yep. And the other issue that CAN has been raising is when the waste is coming out of the pool and into the dry casks, the children can't be at school. The school is right there. It's literally across the street from the plant. And that cannot happen while those children are in the school. It has happened in the past. We're hoping it won't happen in the future. There's another another school across the river, and that's one of the issues that CAN has been working on. Do you want to say your name?
I have a question about the dry casks, especially the inside part, which I think is stainless steel. I was reading a paper last night by Sally Shaw, which I think is being presented to the NCAP group, and it sounded as though Entergy and perhaps others in the nuclear industry were trying to have the casks be much thinner and not last nearly as long. And I just think that's abhorrent. And I hope that the state can do something if the federal won't, because it's bad enough that the spent fuel is going to be in there for, I don't know, 50 or 100 years, if we're lucky. But to have it be less than that is unconscionable. So I hope that something can be done that way.
So the question is on the type of casks that are being proposed to hold the fuel when it goes into dry cask. And Chris, do you mind just saying what the NDCAP is before you answer the dry cask question?
No problem. So NDCAP is the Nuclear Citizens Decommissioning Advisory Panel. No, Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel, and DIDCAP. And it's a group of 19 people from state agencies and mostly citizens, and some from the host community as well as from the plant, that talk about the decommissioning issues. So, so on dry cask storage canisters, those have to be approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they are, and the state really truly has no authority, no regulatory authority over those. We may have some persuasive authority over it, but truthfully, Nancy, no one knows how long these casks last.
Right.
We've started putting fuel in them 10, 15 years ago. We don't know. And they're supposed to last 90 years, and then you're supposed to change them out and put them in a new cask for another 90 years. And somebody do the math for me. How many times do you have to do that to get to 10,000 years? I don't know, but it doesn't seem workable. So, we will look for the most robust cask that we can get that is still, transportable in the event that we are able to find a cooperative host community that would actually want this. Truly, look, I appreciate the fact that that a centralized place that it may not be the most desirable, but I think we can all agree that when these plants were constructed, people would not think they're all along waterways. They are all along places that are flood prone. They are all along places that have river environments associated with river, lake, ocean environments associated with them. I don't think anybody would say, you know what, let's store the nuclear fuel at those sites for hundreds of thousands of years. We just wouldn't. In climate change, they'll be underwater in 100 years, let alone 10,000 years. So, I appreciate that this is a pickle that needs to be resolved, but I don't agree with leaving it in place either. So, unless Mars is an option soon, I think centralized locations need to be, and I wouldn't do that to Mars either.
Well, there you go.
I really wouldn't.
So we need to wrap up. So do you
Sorry.
want to do closing comments?
Yes, thank you. What I'd like to say is that there seems to be a growing sentiment among a lot of people who were normally kind of laid-back activists that are now saying, we've been doing this for too long, we have to move forward. And I see more and more people stepping forward for civil disobedience. In my neighborhood, we've had it for the pipelines, the giant pipelines that the Spectre's trying to put through. We had it for Indian Point. We have the Indian Point 11 that were arrested for disorderly conduct. And guilty and proud of it was how they pleaded. And next time that, and they said, you know, we're pleading guilty because we plan on doing this again. What does it take? What does it take to put some kind of safe regulatory action and power? And I'm hearing and seeing this from other people. It's a time to be more active and more to put out what we really feel and to challenge the system in ways that has not been done lately. So one of the things that we are doing in New York at Stony Point Center is sponsoring a summit at the end of April, and it's going to be a safe energy summit with an emphasis on nuclear power and how what we can do, and maybe talking about some of the issues that come up. You have a nuance to moving waste to centralized storage that I hadn't really given enough thought to, and it is a pickle. So we're hoping to look at issues like that and maybe make a move towards a movement where we can work with people better in Vermont and also people in California, maybe use some of the same language, maybe come up with some solutions that might work for things like storage of radioactive waste. So I'm hoping to connect with some of the people from Vermont, and I'd invite anybody who's interested to see me and get more information about safe energies. Yeah, there are cards. Oh, thank you. There are cards back there. There's you may not be too interested in Indian Point, but you may take a look at some of our postcards that we have been using to reach out to general public, and you might get an idea of some of the things that could be useful here in Vermont. And please help yourself and take them. And my card is back there too, back on the table as you go out the door. You can't miss it. So do take my card. And it's the Indian Point Safe Energy Coalition. We've all come together under that title, and we're all working on this summit, and really hope to invite Vermonters and people from all over the country to see what we can do working together and how we can move forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Marilyn. Good job. So there are a couple of points I want to make, and I'll start with the kind of ability to work with other states and cooperatively. I'm pleased to say that, you know, the NRC is doing rulemaking on decommissioning plants and how to do it, and we were so upset with kind of the inability to see like logical things being done. We drafted suggested comments for areas that they should address, and Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York all joined in our comments on Friday. California, New Jersey, and other states wrote their own, but very similar. So I'm hopeful that with, you know, like these major states weighing in, including Vermont as a major state, weighing in on this, that, you know, that the NRC will actually start making rules that will accommodate states' interests and local communities' interests. The other thing I want to say is really about the movie. Let's come back to the movie. This is a great film. I really do need to acknowledge that in the balance of looking at the workers at these plants, their commitment, what they're trying to do, I want to acknowledge that they've done a great job, and they try and do a good job. Yeah. And their perspective is different than maybe many of ours, but they are doing, you know, they're committed employees, as I think we all are, trying to figure out how to work through this. And that's a good thing, because the things could be a lot worse than they are. Accidents happen. Human error, mostly I think it's engineering and human arrogance, not human behavior and lack of commitment to try and do the right thing. And so I think that's a bridge that we can use to actually try and move this conversation forward. I've certainly tried that with Entergy and with their employees with some success. We reached some agreements that, you know, make sense and then help us move forward. So don't forget that these are people in every aspect of this, all trying just to do the best they can at any given moment.
It's an important point.
I totally agree with that, and another one of Can's positions is that the workers should stay at the plant for as long as possible during decommissioning because they have the knowledge about all the different aspects of the plant, the things that have happened there, the hot spots, and it really helps to have that core knowledge there as the decommissioning is happening, and so Can has worked to try to keep the workforce in place for as long as possible. I also just wanted to say, if you're interested in following the activities of the NDCAP, vtcitizen.org has a compilation of the documents and the videos of the meetings that have happened and all of that. They meet about once a month, I think, at this point. So you can see what's been going on if you're interested. That's the Vermont Citizens Action Network website, vtcitizen.org. So thank you all for coming. I hope you had a good time and
Thanks.
stay active out there.
Yeah,
That's right.
thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
I saw a great big tourist bus of folks from out of town. For 40 days and 40 nights, they covered miles of ground. They had a map and compass, but they still were not arriving. Oh, they couldn't get to Pleasantville, so they kept on driving. And then one day the sirens blew, the county was aghast. It seems the aging nuke plant had an accident at last. The stockholders who fainted couldn't be reached for reviving. And they couldn't get to Pleasantville because there was no driving. The highways turned to parking lots from Albany to Queens. The politicians learned just what evacuation means. They frantically assembled all their staff for some contriving. But they couldn't get to Pleasantville because there was no driving. They knew the Hudson River was contaminated now. The radiation off the charts of what they could allow. They cursed the leaky nuke plants and its owners for their jiving. But they couldn't get to Pleasantville because there was no driving.